The alarm screamed through the bridge of the UCS Vengeance as Captain Lisa Grant pulled herself from her chair. The red lights bathed everything in crimson while her crew rushed to their stations. Something had triggered their deep space sensors, and it was not a drill. Lieutenant Amy Foster pressed her earpiece tight against her head as waves of static filled the communications array. Her fingers danced across the control panel trying to clean up whatever signal they were receiving. The noise was unlike anything she had heard before, and it came from a direction where no human ship should be. Commander Jake Murphy studied the tactical display with growing concern. The signal originated from a star system 3 light-years away in unexplored space. No colony ships had gone that direction, and their patrol routes never extended so far from human territory. Yet something out there was broadcasting on emergency frequencies. Captain Grant moved behind Foster's station and watched the translation software struggle with the incoming data. The computers had never encountered this language before, but they worked to break down the mathematical patterns and basic concepts. Slowly, words began to form on the screen. "We are dying. Our world ends." The message repeated over and over in simple phrases that cut through the static like a knife. "Any who hear this, please help us. We do not have long. Our cities fall and our people drown. Please someone answer." The bridge fell silent except for the hum of computers and the distant vibration of the ship's engines. Grant felt her chest tighten as she read the desperate words. Somewhere in the darkness between stars, an entire civilization was crying out for salvation. Dr. Helen Price looked up from her science station with pale features. She had been analyzing the accompanying data that came with the message, and what she found made her hands shake. The star system was experiencing massive stellar instability that would tear apart any planets in its path. "Chief," Petty Officer Rick Stone whistled low as he reviewed the technical specifications the aliens had included. Their world was covered in vast oceans with cities built deep beneath the waves. The stellar problems were causing tidal forces that pulled their underwater homes apart piece by piece. Grant walked to the main view screen and stared into the star field ahead. Protocol demanded she forward this message to Colonial Command and wait for orders. A proper relief mission would take weeks to organize and deploy. Ships designed for rescue work would be loaded with medical supplies and engineering equipment. But the Vengeance was not a rescue ship. She was a destroyer built for war with plasma cannons that could crack a moon, and torpedo tubes loaded with enough firepower to level cities. Her crew of 200 were soldiers trained to fight and kill, not to heal and save. The message played again through the speakers, and Grant closed her eyes. "We do not have long." The simple words carried the weight of billions of lives hanging by a thread in the cosmic dark. How long could they wait for help that might come too late? Murphy approached his captain with the star charts displayed on his tablet. According to their navigation computers, the alien system was just at the edge of their jump range. They could reach it, but the trip would drain most of their fuel reserves and leave them stranded until a supply ship found them. Foster turned in her chair with tears in her eyes. "Captain, the message is getting weaker. I think their transmitters are failing, or maybe their power systems are shutting down. Each broadcast is a little more broken than the last." The bridge crew looked to their captain for guidance. They were warriors who had sworn oaths to protect humanity and defend the colonies from any threat. But now they faced something different. Not an enemy to fight, but innocents to save. Grant thought of her daughter back on Earth, who was probably sleeping in her bed surrounded by stuffed animals and picture books. She thought of the promise she had made when Lisa was born, that she would make the galaxy a safer place for the next generation, set course for the alien system. "Maximum burn." The words left her mouth before she could stop them. Her crew stared at her for a moment before Murphy nodded and began entering coordinates into the navigation system. "Captain, are you sure about this?" Stone stepped forward with concern in his voice. "We are not equipped for rescue operations. Our cargo holds are full of ammunition and spare parts, not food and medical supplies. We carry what we carry," Grant replied as she returned to her command chair. "But we will not ignore a cry for help just because we are not perfect for the job. Prepare for jump." The Vengeance shuddered as her engines built power for the hyperspace transition. The alien message continued to play through the speakers, growing weaker with each repetition. Soon the signal would fade completely, and the dying civilization would be alone in the dark. Foster worked frantically to record every piece of data the aliens had transmitted. Their language patterns and technical specifications might be crucial when they arrived. The translation software was learning quickly and now understood most of their basic concepts. Price studied the stellar data and shook her head. The alien sun was entering a phase that would make it dangerously unstable for decades. Even if they could evacuate the population, there would be no going home. An entire species was about to become refugees with nowhere to run. The jump alarm sounded, and Grant gripped her chair as reality twisted around them. Space folded and compressed while the ship rode the wave between dimensions. The alien system rushed toward them at impossible speed while their message grew fainter and fainter. Murphy counted down the final seconds before they dropped back into normal space. Whatever they found on the other side would test every skill they possessed and push their ship beyond its limits. They were soldiers heading into the unknown to fight an enemy they could not shoot. The last thing Grant heard before the jump completed was the alien message one final time. "We are dying. Our world ends. Any who hear this, please help us." She whispered a prayer to whatever gods might be listening that they would arrive in time. The Vengeance was not the ship these aliens needed, but she was the ship that came. Sometimes that had to be enough. The Vengeance dropped out of hyperspace with a violent shudder that sent coffee cups flying across the bridge. Captain Lisa Grant gripped her chair as the ship's artificial gravity struggled to compensate for the sudden transition back to normal space. Emergency lights flickered overhead while the crew worked to stabilize their systems after the long jump. Lieutenant Amy Foster immediately began scanning the communication frequencies for any sign of the alien distress signal. Her equipment picked up dozens of weak transmissions coming from the third planet in the system, but most were too garbled to understand. The universal translator worked overtime trying to decode the strange language patterns. Commander Jake Murphy activated the main view screen, and everyone on the bridge fell silent at what they saw. The alien world hung before them like a blue marble streaked with violent white storms that covered half its surface. Massive hurricanes larger than Earth's continents spun across the oceans, while lightning crackled between towering clouds. Dr. Helen Price studied the sensor readings with growing alarm. The planet's tidal forces were completely out of control, causing waves thousands of feet high to crash against each other in endless chaos. No land masses were visible above the churning waters, which meant the entire civilization lived beneath the waves. Chief Petty Officer Rick Stone pulled up the stellar analysis on his workstation and whistled softly. The system's star pulsed with dangerous energy fluctuations that sent gravitational waves rippling through space. Each pulse made the planet wobble on its axis like a spinning top about to fall over. "Captain, we are receiving a direct transmission," Foster announced as she worked to clean up the incoming signal. "The aliens have detected our arrival and they are trying to communicate with us. Their excitement is coming through even without full translation." Grant nodded and straightened her uniform jacket. "Open a channel and let me speak with them. Whatever we say next will determine how this first contact goes. Our words could mean the difference between hope and despair for an entire species." The main screen shifted from the storm-racked planet to show a strange underwater chamber filled with floating alien figures. The beings looked almost like humanoid sea creatures with translucent skin and large, dark eyes. Their leader swam forward and began speaking in rapid, excited tones. The translation came through the speakers a few seconds later in a voice filled with desperate relief. "Blessed travelers, you have answered our call across the void. Are you the peacekeepers we have heard stories about? Are you the healers who bring salvation to dying worlds? Please tell us you carry hope in your ships." Grant felt her stomach drop as she realized what the aliens expected. They had sent a military destroyer bristling with weapons and filled with soldiers trained for combat. The last thing these peaceful creatures needed was to learn that their saviors were warriors from a death world. "We have received your distress signal and come to offer assistance," Grant replied carefully. "Can you tell us more about your situation and what kind of help you need? We want to understand how we can best serve your people in this crisis." The alien leader's features brightened with something that might have been joy. His people called him Elder Counselor Reefsinger, and he spoke for all 17 underwater cities that dotted their world. Each city held millions of citizens who had lived in peace beneath the waves for thousands of years. "Our star grows angry and sends waves of force that tear at our ocean floors," Reefsinger explained, while images of collapsing city structures appeared on the screen. "Our deepest foundations crack and our homes float away into the crushing depths. We have perhaps 10 cycles before all is lost." Foster worked to convert the alien time measurements and looked up with pale features. Captain 10 cycles equals about 8 days in our standard time. After that, the tidal forces will be too strong for any structure to survive intact. Murphy studied the tactical display showing the positions of all 17 cities scattered across the planet's ocean floor. Some were already showing signs of severe structural damage while others had gone completely silent. The scope of the disaster was beyond anything they had prepared for. Price accessed the ship's database and shook her head grimly. "Captain, we don't carry the kind of equipment needed for large-scale underwater construction. Our fabrication systems are designed for ship repairs, not building new cities or reinforcing existing ones." Stone reviewed the power requirements for any serious rescue operation, and his expression grew grim. "Even if we had the right tools, it would take months to stabilize one city, let alone 17. The energy demands alone would require a fleet of engineering ships working around the clock." Grant felt the weight of impossible expectations settling on her shoulders. These aliens had sent their desperate plea into space hoping for miracle workers who could save their entire civilization. Instead, they got a single destroyer with weapons meant for war, not tools meant for salvation. "Elder Counselor, we need to be honest about our capabilities," Grant said slowly. "We are a military vessel, not a relief ship. Our equipment and training are focused on combat operations rather than large-scale rescue missions." The silence that followed lasted for several long minutes while the alien leader processed this information. His large dark eyes seemed to dim with the realization that their salvation might not be what they had hoped for. The other aliens in the background began speaking in worried tones. Military Reef Singer finally repeated the word like he was tasting something bitter. "You are warriors, then. You carry weapons instead of healing tools. You bring death instead of life to those who need aid." "We carry weapons," yes, Grant admitted without shame, "but that does not mean we bring only death. Sometimes warriors are the first to arrive when disasters strike. Sometimes soldiers are the ones who run toward danger when others run away." Reef Singer studied the human captain through the communication. Lincoln Grant could see him trying to understand the concept of warriors who might help instead of harm. His species had apparently never developed military forces or learned to fight wars. "We request permission to send representatives to your vessel," Reef Singer said finally. "Perhaps face-to-face discussions will help us understand what aid you can provide. Time grows short and we must explore every option for survival." Grant glanced at Murphy, who nodded slightly. "Permission granted, Elder Counselor. We will prepare our docking bay to receive your people safely. Perhaps together we can find solutions that neither of us could discover alone." As the transmission ended, Grant realized they stood at a crossroads that would define both species forever. The aliens would soon learn that their rescuers were the feared Deathworlders that other civilizations whispered about in terror. But they would also discover that sometimes the strongest warriors possessed the gentlest hearts. The alien shuttle docked with the Vengeance with a soft thud that echoed through the cargo bay. Captain Lisa Grant watched through the observation window as her crew prepared the docking area with portable atmosphere processors and translation equipment. They had no idea what to expect from their first face-to-face meeting with an aquatic species. Chief Petty Officer Rick Stone monitored the environmental systems as the shuttle's airlock cycled open. A mixture of water and strange gases poured out onto the deck, creating a small pool around the alien vessel. The smell of brine and unknown chemicals filled the air despite the atmospheric filters. 3 figures emerged from the shuttle wearing bulky environmental suits filled with their native ocean water. They moved slowly and carefully on legs that seemed more suited for swimming than walking. The lead figure was clearly Elder Counselor Reef Singer based on the ornate markings carved into his protective gear. Lieutenant Amy Foster activated the portable translation system and tested the communication link. The aliens could hear human speech through their suits while their responses were converted into English by the ship's computers. The process was still imperfect, but it allowed for basic conversation. Captain Grant stepped forward and offered a formal greeting that she hoped would show respect without seeming threatening. "Welcome aboard the UCS Vengeance, Elder Counselor. I am Captain Lisa Grant and these are my senior officers. We are honored by your visit and hope we can find ways to help your people." Reef Singer looked around the cargo bay with what seemed like growing alarm. The walls were lined with weapon storage lockers and spare missile components. Battle damage from previous conflicts showed as repaired hull plates and replaced equipment. Everything about the ship screamed military purpose. "Your vessel is truly designed for war," the alien leader said quietly. The translation carried undertones of fear and disappointment. We had hoped for ships of healing and construction, but instead we find engines of destruction. How can weapons save our dying cities? Commander Jake Murphy stepped beside his captain and gestured toward the assembled crew. Elder Counselor, these weapons exist to protect innocent lives. Every person on the ship swore an oath to defend those who cannot defend themselves. We may carry tools of war, but we use them in service of peace. Sergeant Paul Davis emerged from the equipment lockers carrying a portable scanner and medical kit. The Marine had volunteered to help with technical assessments despite having no formal engineering training. His scarred face and muscular build made him look like exactly what he was, a professional soldier. The aliens seemed to shrink back as Davis approached, but he moved slowly and kept his hands visible. I need to scan your environmental suits to understand your life support requirements, he explained in a gentle voice that contrasted sharply with his intimidating appearance. Dr. Helen Price activated the main display screen and showed the collected data about their star system. Elder Counselor, we have analyzed your situation and the challenges are greater than we initially understood. Your star's instability is accelerating faster than our models predicted. The stellar fluctuations were causing gravitational waves that rippled through space like invisible tsunamis. Each wave hit the alien planet and twisted its oceans into impossible shapes. The underwater cities built into the seafloor were being literally torn apart by forces beyond their control. Reef Singer shared technical specifications for their 17 cities, and the scope of the disaster became clear. Each settlement housed between 50 million and 300 million citizens. Their evacuation ships could carry perhaps 50,000 people per trip, and they only had enough vessels for a few dozen flights. We cannot abandon our people to die in the depths, Reef Singer said with obvious anguish. But we also cannot save them all with our limited resources. We had hoped that star-traveling peoples would possess technologies beyond our understanding. Stone studied the city construction data and pointed out something interesting. These underwater habitats are built in modular sections that can be detached from their foundations. The designers planned for the possibility of moving them to new locations if needed, but the detachment process requires precise cutting tools and massive lifting capacity, Murphy added as he reviewed the technical requirements. Each city section weighs millions of tons and must be handled with extreme care to avoid crushing the inhabitants inside. Davis looked up from his scanner with a thoughtful expression. Captain, our plasma cutting systems could slice through those foundation anchors cleanly. The beam intensity can be adjusted for precision work instead of combat applications. Price nodded slowly as she began calculating the energy requirements. Our tractor beam arrays are designed for manipulating enemy ships during battle. With modifications, they might be able to lift and guide the city sections to safe orbital positions. Grant felt a spark of hope as her crew began brainstorming solutions using their military equipment for rescue purposes. The Vengeance might not be a purpose-built relief ship, but it carried enough raw power to attempt the impossible. Elder Counselor, we cannot save your planet, but we might be able to save your people, Grant said carefully. It would require converting our weapons into tools and pushing our ship beyond its design limits. The risk would be enormous for everyone involved. Reef Singer floated motionless in his environmental suit for long moments while he processed this unexpected possibility. His people had sent their distress call expecting traditional rescue ships with cargo holds full of supplies and medical equipment. Instead, they received warriors willing to sacrifice themselves for strangers. You would do this, the alien asked with disbelief clear in his translated voice. Risk your lives and your ship for a species you have never met. What do you gain from such sacrifice? We have no weapons to offer and no technology you need. Grant looked around at her crew and saw the same determination in every face. They were soldiers who had sworn oaths to protect the innocent regardless of species or reward. The desperate call from across the void had activated something deeper than military duty. Elder Counselor, you sent a message asking for help, Grant replied simply. We heard that message and came as quickly as possible. That is what civilized beings do for each other in times of crisis. No other reason is needed. Davis stepped forward and offered his scanner to Reef Singer. Sir, with your permission, I would like to examine the structural weak points in your city foundations. If we are going to attempt this rescue, we need to understand exactly what we are dealing with. The alien leader accepted the device with trembling hands and Grant realized they had crossed an invisible threshold. These were no longer strangers asking for help from passing ships. They had become people worth saving, and that changed everything. Stone was already calculating power requirements, while Murphy planned orbital mechanics for lifting city-sized structures. Price worked on atmospheric entry procedures for a destroyer never designed to enter planetary atmospheres. The impossible was becoming merely difficult through the stubborn refusal of warriors to accept defeat. The Vengeance positioned herself in high orbit above the dying alien world, while her crew worked around the clock to convert weapons of war into tools of salvation. Captain Lisa Grant had not slept in 36 hours as she supervised the desperate modifications needed to attempt the impossible rescue. Chief Petty Officer Rick Stone crawled through the plasma cannon assemblies with a team of technicians rewiring the targeting systems. The massive weapons designed to vaporize enemy ships now needed the precision to cut through underwater foundations without harming the millions of citizens living above them. Lieutenant Amy Foster coordinated with alien engineers in the 17 doomed cities below. Her communication station buzzed constantly with status reports and technical questions as both species worked together, despite never having met before this crisis. The universal translator struggled with complex engineering terms, but somehow they made progress. Commander Jake Murphy studied orbital mechanics equations that hurt his head to contemplate. Moving city sections the size of small mountains from the ocean floor to stable orbit required calculations no military officer had ever attempted. One mistake would send millions of tons of habitat spinning into space or crashing back to the planet. Dr. Helen Price monitored the star's increasing instability with growing alarm. Each gravitational pulse was stronger than the last, and the time between fluctuations was shrinking rapidly. Her latest projections gave them perhaps 6 days before the tidal forces became completely unsurvivable. Sergeant Paul Davis led Marine teams down to the planet's surface in modified landing craft that had been hastily converted into underwater vessels. The soldiers worked alongside alien technicians to prepare the city foundations for separation, using cutting charges and structural supports. The first test came with Deep City Coral Home, which housed 80 million souls in its towering spires and sprawling residential complexes. Davis and his team had spent 2 days learning how to operate in the crushing depths, while alien engineers explained the delicate process of foundation separation. Section 7 is ready for lift, Davis reported through his underwater communication gear. The foundation anchors are prepped for cutting, and the population has been moved to the center modules for stability. We are as ready as we will ever be. Grant watched the tactical display as her ship's modified plasma beams reached down through the ocean to touch the city's base supports. The beams that could slice through battleship armor now worked with surgical precision to sever the connections that held the habitat to the sea. Floorstone monitored power consumption as the ship's reactors strained to provide energy for both the cutting beams and the massive tractor arrays. The Vengeance was drawing more power than her designers had ever intended, and warning lights flashed across every engineering station. The first city section broke free from its moorings and began to rise through the water, column guided by invisible tractor beams. Grant held her breath as millions of tons of habitat climbed toward the surface, carrying more lives than had ever been moved at one time in galactic history. Foster maintained constant communication with the city's population as they experienced their first journey beyond their ocean world. The aliens had never seen stars or planets from space, and their excited chatter filled the communication channels despite the danger they faced. Price tracked the ascending habitat on her sensors and called out altitude readings as it cleared the planetary atmosphere. 1,000 kilometers above surface, 2,000, 3,000. The city section was entering stable orbit exactly where Murphy's calculations had predicted. The second city section followed an hour later with even better results as the crew refined their techniques. Then the third and fourth as they fell into a rhythm of precise coordination between ship and ground teams. Each successful lift brought cheers from both human and alien crews. But as they attempted to lift the fifth city section, disaster struck without warning. The star's instability spiked dramatically, sending massive gravitational waves rippling through the system. The ascending habitat began to shake apart under forces that no structure could withstand. Section 12 is breaking up, Price shouted over the alarm sirens that filled the bridge. Hull integrity failing across multiple levels. They have maybe 3 minutes before complete structural collapse with 400 million people inside. Grant made a decision that would have gotten her court-martialed under normal circumstances. "Take us into the atmosphere," she ordered as she strapped herself into her command chair. "Use our shields to protect the city section from the gravitational waves until we can get it to safety. Captain. The Vengeance is not designed for atmospheric flight." Murphy protested even as he began inputting the commands. "We could lose structural integrity ourselves if the planetary forces tear us apart. Then we better move fast," Grant replied grimly. "Sometimes you have to risk everything to save everything else." The destroyer dove toward the planet like a falling meteor, with her military-grade shields flaring bright against the turbulent atmosphere. The ship groaned and shuddered as forces she was never meant to handle tried to tear her apart. Hull plates buckled and warning lights bathed every corridor in red. Stone watched his instruments in horror as the ship's temperature readings climbed toward critical levels. "Captain, we cannot maintain this for long. The hull is heating beyond safe parameters, and our shield generators are overloading." Foster coordinated the emergency evacuation procedures as sections of the failing city habitat were transferred to the other orbital facilities. The aliens worked with desperate efficiency to save as many lives as possible before their home completely disintegrated. Davis and his Marines stayed with the collapsing city section until the last possible moment, helping alien families reach the emergency transporters. The sergeant refused direct orders to evacuate early because he would not abandon civilians while he could still help them. Murphy fought the ship's controls as atmospheric turbulence threatened to send them spinning out of control. The destroyer's sleek hull design was meant for the vacuum of space, not the crushing atmosphere of a dying world. Every system strained beyond its limits. The city section finally cleared the danger zone and reached stable orbit, just as its weakest structures gave way completely. Millions of lives had been saved by minutes and the sacrifice of a warship that chose to shield strangers with her own body. Grant watched the hull temperature readings slowly decrease as they climbed back toward space. The Vengeance looked like she had been through a war with scorched armor and buckled plates, but she was still flying and her crew was still fighting. 17 hours of continuous operations. 12 city sections safely in orbit with 5 more to go. The impossible was becoming merely difficult through the stubborn determination of warriors who refused to abandon hope. The final city section broke free from the dying planet, just as the star began its most violent convulsion yet. Captain Lisa Grant watched through the bridge view screen as massive chunks of ocean floor tore away from the world below while gravitational waves twisted space itself into impossible shapes. Lieutenant Amy Foster counted off the successful evacuations, with tears streaming down her face. 17 underwater cities now floated safely in orbital formations around the planet, while transport ships from neighboring star systems rushed to collect the survivors. Every soul that could be saved had been saved. The Vengeance drifted in high orbit like a wounded animal licking its wounds after a brutal fight. Her hull bore scorch marks from atmospheric entry, and several armor plates had buckled completely during the rescue operations. Weapon systems sat offline and her engines ran on backup power that flickered with each surge. Chief Petty Officer Rick Stone emerged from the engineering sections covered in coolant fluid and burn gel. His report painted a grim picture of a ship pushed far beyond her design limits. They had fusion leaks in 3 compartments and the main reactor was cycling through emergency shutdown procedures. Commander Jake Murphy plotted a course toward the nearest human starbase, knowing they would barely make it on their remaining fuel reserves. The Vengeance had given everything she had to save an alien species and now limped through space like a ghost ship held together by determination alone. Dr. Helen Price monitored the final death throes of the alien homeworld as tidal forces literally pulled continents apart. The ocean boiled away into space while the planet's core began to destabilize under the star's relentless gravitational assault. Nothing could survive what was coming next. Sergeant Paul Davis helped coordinate the transfer of injured crew members to the medical bay where exhausted medics worked to treat burns and radiation exposure. The Marines had spent days in hostile, underwater environments using equipment never designed for such conditions, but they had brought everyone home alive. Elder Counselor Reef Singer requested permission to visit the bridge one final time before his people departed for their new homes among distant stars. The alien leader moved slowly through corridors, lined with battle damage and emergency repairs, While his escort explained the cost of their salvation, "Captain Grant, you have given us the greatest gift possible," Reef Singer said as he entered the command center. "You have given us tomorrow. Our children will grow up among alien suns because your warriors chose to answer a cry for help from strangers." Grant stood before the main view screen watching the alien transport ships load millions of refugees for journeys to worlds they had never seen. Each vessel carried families who would never again swim in the oceans of their birth, but who would live to create new homes elsewhere. "The galaxy is vast and dangerous," Elder Counselor Grant replied quietly. "But it is also filled with species who help each other in times of crisis. Your people will find welcome among the stars, and perhaps one day they will answer a distress call from others who need salvation." Reef Singer studied the human captain who had sacrificed her ship and crew to save people she had never met. His species had lived in isolation beneath their ocean for thousands of years, believing they were alone in the universe. Now they learned that strangers could become family through acts of courage. "Your ship bears terrible scars from our rescue," the alien said with obvious guilt. "Your weapons are broken and your hull burns with heat damage from our atmosphere. What will your leaders say when they learn you damaged a military vessel to save civilians of another species?" Foster looked up from her communication station where she had been monitoring messages from Human Command. "Captain, we have received new orders from Colonial Fleet Headquarters. They are assigning us to escort duty for the refugee convoy until all civilians reach safe harbors." Murphy displayed the operational parameters on his tactical screen and whistled softly. The escort mission would take them to 12 different star systems over the next 6 months. It was exactly the kind of assignment given to ships whose crews had proven themselves worthy of the highest trust, and Stone reported that repair ships were already en route to provide emergency assistance and materials for permanent fixes. The Vengeance would be rebuilt stronger than before with upgrades and improvements earned through her heroic service. She would carry scars but also honors that few ships ever received. Price accessed the long-range communication arrays and showed Grant a series of messages flooding in from across human space. Word of their rescue mission had spread through normal communication channels, and civilian populations were demanding to know more about the aliens they had saved. Davis gathered his Marines in the cargo bay, where they had first met the alien representatives days earlier. The soldiers stood in formation despite their injuries and exhaustion, because they wanted to salute the species they had fought to preserve. Professional warriors honoring innocent civilians. The first transport ship departed orbit carrying 50 million alien refugees toward a water world in the Beta sector where they could build underwater cities similar to their lost homes. Reef Singer watched through the viewports as his people began their greatest journey into an unknown future. "We will remember this always," he promised Grant as his own ship prepared to leave. "Our children will learn the names of every human who answered our call. The species you call Zelani will never forget that warriors from a death world chose to save us instead of ignore us." Grant watched the refugee ships disappear into hyperspace one by one, carrying an entire civilization toward new lives among distant suns. The rescue had taken 17 hours of continuous operations, but the consequences would echo through galactic history for generations to come. 6 months later, Grant stood on the bridge of her rebuilt ship as she received new orders. The Vengeance had been converted into the first human vessel designed specifically for deep space rescue operations. Her weapons remained, but now she also carried medical equipment and engineering tools. Her crew had requested to stay together under her command, knowing that their captain would always answer distress calls regardless of who sent them. They were still warriors from a death world, but they had become something more during those desperate hours above an alien ocean. The galaxy remained vast and dangerous, filled with countless species who viewed humanity with fear and suspicion. But scattered among the stars were those who knew the truth about the people called Deathworlders. They knew that when darkness fell and hope died, someone would hear their cry and they would send destroyers, because sometimes salvation arrived not from those who spoke of peace, but from those who fought to protect it. Sometimes the deadliest worlds forged the most compassionate souls who proved that strength and gentleness could exist in the same heart. The Vengeance turned toward deep space where new distress calls waited in the darkness between stars. Her crew was ready to answer them all, because that was what civilized beings did for each other when the universe tried to tear them apart.